Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Vladimir Putin tells President Trump Russia will respond to Ukraine's weekend drone attack as the two leaders speak on the phone. Aid distribution centres in Gaza are closed as Israel's military warns roads leading to the sites will be considered combat zones. And President Donald Trump's doubled tariffs on steel and aluminium imports come into play from today. To our top story, and President Trump has said he has spoken to Russia's president. The US president said the two leaders discussed Ukraine's recent attack on air bases in Russia, which Putin said he would respond to. Talking to Truth Social, the US president said, "I just finished speaking by telephone with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. The call lasted approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. We discussed the attack on Russia's docked airplanes by Ukraine and also various other attacks that have been taking place by both sides. It was a good conversation, but not a conversation that will lead to immediate peace." President Putin did say, and very strongly, that he will have to respond to the recent attack on those airfields. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Al Arabiya English journalist Wandi Ntengento and Al Arabiya editor Wissam Keyrouz. Thank you so much for both joining me this evening. So I just want to start, Wissam, with you. So another telephone conversation between Trump and Putin. Once again, Trump referred to it as a good conversation. He's done this in the past. But he also said this is not going to lead to immediate peace. So can we assume an attack from Russia is imminent and sort of the ceasefire is now on the back burner?
Let's talk numbers first. It's the fourth phone conversation between Trump and Putin, and we are yet to see any major change in the course of this operation peace. It is 1 hour, 15 minutes to be added to 5 hours already spent on the phones. That's 6 hours and 15 minutes, making it the longest conversation between Trump and Putin, or between Putin and any world leader.
But one thing I must add in there has to be a translator.
Yeah, definitely.
So that can probably also add to the time. But I do agree.
It will add a lot.
They like to have their chats on the phone.
They like to chat. Let's put it in comparison with the first Trump first Trump term. That was 18 phone calls and 3 meetings. But in any way, let's put things into context. A few days ago, Trump says, "I'm giving Putin 2 weeks or a bit less to see what will happen, to see if he is serious." And then we see one huge operation that allegedly blew up 40% of the strategic capabilities of Russia in terms of strategic bombers. It was one operation that apparently will be remembered in history as one of the greatest operations in the history of warfare. So somehow, maybe Russia is winning the war, maybe Russia is winning history, but it's definitely losing the story. Imagine all those big negative stories for Russia. You have, starting by the Crimea bridge, then you have this and many others. Having said this, it's either that America was somehow involved or at least knew about what the Ukrainians were doing. And that was the signal that the Americans accepted as something that could be a leverage against a very reluctant Putin, or that the Americans didn't know, which I doubt honestly. And what they are trying now is saying, okay, we accept the retaliation, but we are trying to contain it. I think retaliation will happen. The person that is Putin, his personality means that he will show that I'm the stronger in this game. So he will probably use what is still intact in his capability, which are ballistic missiles. So a retaliation will happen, and it's yet to be more impressive. But it has to be contained, because otherwise we are drifting towards something very dangerous. He will be losing the positive momentum with Trump, the possibility to sit on a table with Trump and do a Yalta #2.
I mean, I remember I think it was a couple of weeks ago when Trump came out basically saying that he was disappointed in Putin. I don't know if you remember that lash out that Trump had done, that he's disappointed, and it just shows that Putin is not serious about ending the war.
Yeah, he said it, and he was always trying to say something negative and immediately follow with something positive, because Trump also is betting a lot on giving the world peace in Ukraine. Let's not forget, Ukraine and Russia is not the #1 priority for Trump. #1 priority for Trump is tariffs, is China, is somewhere else. But it's his ego. He said, I'm going to bring peace in 24 hours. And Putin is not helping him, because Putin got a lot of very premature gifts from Trump himself, and he has a crisis of leverage, Trump. So now this is why I believe there is a lot of signals that lead us to believe that the Americans are, at least they knew about it, and this is something that will be used to bring Russia into a point where they accept to concede.
And it is also interesting because I think through Donald Trump's Truth Social today, we really see that he's resigned to the fact that Russia will strike Ukraine in retaliation for this big airbase attack, a year and a half in the making, with drones. As you say, audacious attack might go down in history as one of the best operations. But I also think, Wandi, he didn't actually, Donald Trump, reference the attack on the Kerch Bridge linking Russia and Crimea. And a lot of people are starting to think, observers, maybe this is something Putin is embarrassed about. But he has actually referred to that Ukraine strike as a terror attack, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has. Look, it's really rich coming from a leader who basically started this war. Had he agreed to go to Istanbul, this would be over. So, yeah, he did call it a terror attack, but, I mean, there are kind of signs. I would say this phone call is a sign that maybe he is softening up a bit regarding peace talks, regarding ending the war.
But then Wissam, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but he basically said it was a terror attack because it caused a train derailment. This is what Vladimir Putin is saying, and killed 7 people. So the attack struck civilians. It's important to say Ukraine has claimed no responsibility in the attack where civilians were targeted. Like Wandi says, is that this is just a bit rich.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget that terminology is not an exact science in this conflict. Let's not forget that using a lot of terminology like terrorism, like Nazism, like, you know, a lot of these words that are very into the Russian narrative. But what does it mean at the end? It doesn't mean a big thing, because every day we have civilian killed, whether it's in Ukraine or in Russia. So civilians are being killed in this war, but also a lot of soldiers as well. I mean, let's not forget that the bleeding of Russia and Ukraine in this war is becoming absurd. I mean, the amount of young people who are dead in this war is absurd. And where will that lead? So now Trump, ironically, did not seem very optimistic. He said this was a good phone call, but not a phone call that will lead to any near peace. So apparently there's a game of realism. We are still far. What is the element that will eventually bring Russia to the point to accept that that has to stop? What is the point that will make Russia feel, okay, we have gained enough, we have changed the map enough, and now it's time to, you know, to stop this?
I think it's becoming really embarrassing for Trump. I mean, his credibility, his reputation, and I mean, before he even was inaugurated, he promised to end the war within 24 hours. And the longer the war continues, the more it dents his reputation. I do kind of understand his irritation at Putin and obviously Zelensky. His reputation is at stake.
But don't worry about Trump. He does not take any blame for anything.
Yeah.
Eventually, in one scenario will say, it's not my war, I'm getting out of it.
Yeah.
But I don't think he will do it. You know, he is still seeing an opportunity. He genuinely believes that Putin is a strong guy and a potential good ally.
Yeah.
And he will try to make it. He will keep trying. Till what point, we don't know. And I think Putin is testing the limit of what Trump can take. And this is very dangerous for him.
But you know, also within that phone call was Iran. And it looks like Putin could help with talks when it comes to Iran. This could be where they can match diplomatically, maybe?
It's one of the study cases of how Trump operates, okay? The businessman operates this way. We have a problem in one area. Let's try to find somewhere better in a different area. So what he's basically doing is saying, let's bring Russia into the Iran paper so that Russia will feel, you know, more engaged with us. It's the same what he has done with the, you know, with the rare earth deal with the Ukrainians. He always brings this element of business, of outside the box. Maybe it will work, but who is not happy about that? It's the Israelis, of course. He is bringing Russia into the negotiations with Iran. Not a good news for Israel.
But once again, you know, it seems to be that they have agreed that the US and Russia say Iran shouldn't have a nuclear weapon. But of course, we've heard from Iran's supreme leader about the fact that abandoning uranium enrichment was 100% against the country's interests. But we know Vladimir Putin and Iran have a relationship. So that's probably another piece of the puzzle where Donald Trump can use the leverage from Russia to try and agree to a deal with Iran.
He's bringing Iran in the leverage with the Russians, and he's bringing the Russians in the leverage with Iran. And he is eventually giving the Iranians the possibility to keep enriching at a low level, according to many, many sources. So apparently the Iranian deal has more chances to concretize earlier than Ukraine.
I'm not surprised that Putin, volunteered to have discussions with Iran. Russia and Iran earlier in the year had signed a treaty, like a military treaty, a 20-year partnership. So I'm not surprised that he's volunteered, and he has no hesitation regarding it.
Yeah.
I mean, like you say, there's so many pieces to this puzzle. We could talk about it all day long, but we're actually going to move on now, and we're going to talk a little bit about another story that has been dominating the headlines, and that's aid distribution centers in Gaza closed today after Palestinians were reportedly killed by Israeli gunfire near an aid site yesterday. In a post on Facebook, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is backed by Israel, said the centres would be shut for renovations, organisation and efficiency improvements. Israel's military has warned roads leading to the sites will be considered combat zones. And in a statement on X, says Hamas is losing its grip on the population in Gaza and its control over humanitarian aid. Earlier, I spoke with Dr. Ahmed Al-Farra, who's the head of the pediatric department at Nasser Hospital, and he told me what he's been witnessing. Take a listen.
We saw yesterday they came by gunshot in the upper part of the body, in the head, in the chest. Suppose that there were a lot of crowdedness there. Suppose there is a lot of something of confusion there. You should alarm them. You should, if there is something about fear or something about security, you can alarm them by shooting the legs, for example, but not in the eye and in the mouth. There is snipers who are enjoying that we saw. All of them, they are adolescent and adult. I think adolescent 10 to 12 years. There is also 20, 25 years. There is a woman also. There is a woman who went there to feed her babies.
Wissam, the real life account there from Dr. Ahmed at Nasser Hospital. It's absolutely terrifying what he had to say to me a little bit earlier. And the Red Cross has called Gaza worse than hell on earth. What are your thoughts on this?
I guess there are no more place for thoughts. I mean, if this is not hell on earth, what is hell on earth? We see apocalyptic images of people who have nothing, who are trying to run to get some food. We hear testimonies of children who say to ask their mothers, when are we going to eat? And yet we see little happening, whether from the international community or from Israel or from also Hamas, because we are all stuck in this place where the most hardliners are in charge. And yet every time we see a breakthrough or maybe a plan that would end this, the parties involved, all of them, both of them, are very happy not to go through, apparently. And in the same time, we have no one to see what's really happening, no journalists on the ground, no independent watchers. We really don't know how bad it is, but we know that it's extremely bad. And we know that people who are impoverished, who are hungry, who have nothing, who have no shelter, no roof, are being bombarded and killed. And how is that even acceptable in 2025 by any standards?
Wandi, I don't know what your feeling is on the aid distribution happening within Gaza right now.
It is quite disappointing to see what really confuses me actually is GHF knew that there were safety and security issues. It really surprises me that they are undergoing renovations and they don't have a plan, a backup plan for this. So I feel that they failed. They failed in their core duties as a body that should be obviously distributing aid to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is where the difficulty is coming in. The GHF have 4 sites. The UN had about 400. And right now, the aid's just not getting to where it needs to be going. And that's something that I think is very difficult for people because they have to walk kilometers to get to these distribution sites. And it is a live, active war zone.
And let's not forget that these sites are operated and run by the Israelis, who are themselves running the war. And this is why we heard this astounding scream from the Red Cross, saying that, of course, it is hell on earth, and also saying that states are not doing enough to end this war, and the suffering of Palestinians and the release Israeli hostages. And of course, they say Palestinians have been stripped of human dignity in the most extreme of ways. And let's not forget, but apparently the sides in this war, Israel and Hamas, the political gains, I mean, what's on their agenda is not a human life, honestly. Because for some in Israel, for some, of course, the narrative is that we want to release the hostages. But for some in Israel, it is a moment where there is a possibility of giving Israel a possibility to empty Gaza of people. Okay, some in Israel do think that this is feasible, this is possible, and that eventually people could leave. And on the other hand, Hamas, they think that whatever happens, as many blood that is shed, it's not a problem because we will not stop being resistance. So we are stuck in a very, very, very inhumane struggle where ideology is taking, the upper hand.
Look, what I see here is that it looks like Israel is using starvation as an instrument of war. And there are questions around...
It's announced. They say it. I mean, they say we are blockading. We are using this for to get the hostages released.
And there are questions around trust when it comes to GHF.
Yeah.
Because they invited civilians to come to these sites, and then the next thing, people are being greeted with bullets on their heads, and so it's people have raised those questions around whether to trust GHF. Yeah.
Yeah, and it just becomes a very complicated situation, I think, on the ground, because, as you said, the trust is lost in many respects. People are desperate for food, so the desperation's there. And let's not forget, Hamas is not releasing these hostages, and that is something that is very difficult. And a lot of people say if Hamas released the hostages and the bodies of the hostages, would this come to an end? Would we see a finalization to this absolute starvation that's happening?
Well, obviously, the hostages has to be released, and the hostages, and Hamas is giving, unfortunately, Israelis a reason, in their thinking, to continue doing. And of course, if Hamas has the hostages, it's not a legitimate reason for Israel to do what it is doing, but it's not legitimate as well for Hamas to keep the hostages for whatever reason. But in any way, the real hostages now, of course, there are the Israeli hostages, but isn't the Gaza people also hostages in this unfair war? They didn't want this war. They didn't apply for it. This is not what they wanted. They were living somehow a much better life. We wouldn't say it's the best life in Gaza, but they were living an okay life. And then they have this. It's hell on earth. They are hostages as well, and they deserve the attention of the world, the people, the weak people, the humanity is failing in Gaza, that's for sure.
And Wandi and Wissam, a question for both of you. We're all journalists sitting here right now. We've spoken about this previously, but Israel just doesn't let international journalists in to cover these stories. So it's really difficult for all of us when we're reporting to get a full picture of actually what's happening. We're asking a doctor in Gaza. We're trying to find evidence where we can. The BBC's been criticised for their coverage. Do you think sending international press in would help or hinder the current situation? Wandi, I don't know. You go first.
Look, it's a yes and no answer for me. There was a recent report that basically showed, that said that more journalists were killed in Gaza than in any war. In any war. So that's an indication of how dangerous it is for journalists to be, I guess, on the ground. And then, of course, not having international press on the ground is compromising on the, I guess, access to information. And obviously, we're not able to get a full picture of what's actually happening on the ground. Safety and security, huge issue for journalists. In my younger days, I did a training called Hostile Environment and First Aid Training. And this is a type of program where you are trained to work in hostile environments like Gaza. You're trained to survive and report on stories in such environments. But I'm telling you right now, with what's going on the ground, I don't think what I've learned during the program, it would apply.
And Wissam, a lot of us journalists have done this hostile training, but in your opinion, like Wandi said, it's extremely dangerous. We've seen a huge volume of journalists being killed trying to cover this story.
The journalists who have been killed are Palestinians, are people from Gaza. They are not journalists who came from outside. Second, the risk of going to that war and covering it is a risk that should be assessed and taken by journalists and by media. And third, whether there are journalists or not, the safety and security of journalists is to be assured by the people on the ground, Israel and Hamas. But most of all, this is a war, and a war has to be covered. And in any conflict where you have people dying, the basic human thought is that we need coverage. We need independent people who are telling us what's happening there. Because any information that we are getting now from Gaza is coming either from people somehow close to Hamas somehow, or from Israel. And also, it's legitimate to listen. People need to know that the Palestinian Health Ministry is the last or one of the very few Palestinian Authority bodies that was not split between Ramallah and Gaza. So anything related to Palestinian Health Ministry is somehow has a certain Palestinian legitimacy, and we cannot say that it's Hamas. But a lot of people around the world are calling very seriously, we need to let journalists, independent journalists on the ground. It is a necessity for the world.
Yes, and that's why many people do end up becoming journalists, obviously war correspondents for things like this. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that story and the extreme circumstances that people are facing in Gaza at the moment. Let's move on to another story making headlines today. And President Donald Trump has doubled tariffs on steel and aluminium imports from today. Trump says the new rates, which have gone from 25% to 50%, are designed to bolster the struggling US metals sector. Earlier, I asked the head of money and markets at Hargreaves Lansdown, Susanna Streeter, why the UK was temporarily exempt from this major increase.
So certainly there was relief, because until yesterday we didn't know whether the UK would be included in this hike to 50%. But it has been given this reprieve, but it will hang on whether or not the final deal can be signed, sealed and delivered with the US, this trade deal. And there appear to be a few sticking points, and we are still hoping that this deal, of course, will be signed. It will be a real blow, in fact, if it is pushed into the long grass. I mean, that doesn't look likely. The indications are that if the deal is signed, the UK won't just benefit from a 25% tariff, but actually will see the tariff go down to zero on exports of steel to the United States.
Wandi, let's start with you. Tariffs. I feel like we've heard a lot about tariffs, haven't we, of late? Let's be honest. And we saw these massive swings in the market on Liberation Day when Donald Trump first announced the tariffs. But today, when I was having a look at the markets, actually ticking higher in Europe. The US appeared to be ticking higher. The dollar sort of steady. So I wonder, Wandi, if the markets are just like, we know how to deal with this. We think concessions are going to come into place. We're taking it in our stride.
Markets are, I think markets are a very emotional entity. And that's expected. But of course, today, the markets opened and it appears that investors are not moved by, obviously, these tariffs. For example, the US dollar is steady at the moment, and we saw some share prices of US steel companies like Cleveland and I think Cleveland and Cliffs and another big player, Nuco, their shares went up. So that's, I guess, a great indication that, the market is accepting it, and, the market is getting used to the craze, the theater that Trump, I guess, gives us on a daily basis. Yeah.
We are not, the market is not moved anymore by market movers.
Yeah.
I mean, markets, they know by now that whatever threshold or numbers we are hearing in this conversation are elements in a negotiation game. Okay, so when you say 145 tariffs with China, it won't be there. We are sure in a couple of months we are not going to hear those numbers. And even 50%, it's a lot also on steel and aluminum. But at the same time, now we know that this is a negotiation game. And we know that somehow things will settle. And let's not forget that Trump said we're going to have some bumps, but the world will not, you know, it's not going to get destroyed. But at the same time, Trump started the problem, started this tariff war for a very clear idea in his mind, to rebalance the deficit in trade. So he will eventually make a lot of advance, hopefully for him, he will make advancement on this. It's going to be bumpy, it's going to take time, and we're going to see. It's a long negotiation game.
But then again, I think, well, something that a chief investment strategist said, Sam, he said that we have to wait until July to really see the impact of tariffs in the market. So now we just sit and watch and then wait for July.
But I also think a lot of other factors come into the markets. You know, they can be reactive, but reactive on data that we're seeing, reactive, you know, there's big markers that come out when it comes to the markets. It's not just the tariffs, essentially. But I do find it absolutely fascinating at the moment. And I think one of the reasons, I don't know if you both agree with me on that, is Wissam, there's concessions. There's always concessions to be made. Donald Trump is the deal maker. He wants countries to be phoning him up and saying, look, this 50% levy is coming into place, but we'll give you a deal. And I wonder if the markets are thinking, Donald Trump is the king deal maker here. Other countries going to have a phone call with Xi Jinping. He's been speaking to Europe. So we don't need to worry that much. Trump will get what he needs, and then the tariffs will be lowered.
Trump is a deal maker, and he is bringing this element of business thinking into the world of politics. But for his opponents, he is making deals in problems that he created himself. So he starts the problem and then he makes a deal out of it. But in the same time, apparently the world is starting to understand the language of Donald Trump. Eventually things will settle. And the world will have to find a way to deal with America that is more assertive and more, the rules have changed. Because America, Trump feels that the game of globalization was so much into the benefits of China, and it has to be rebalanced somehow. And for many, it is legitimate. Now, what will happen, how it will happen? Now we know that the markets are less worried, less emotional. We know it's not gonna crumble. But let's not forget that the dollar has lost somewhere around 10% in the last 4 months. And if we have a snapshot on what is the US economy today, and he was bragging about it the other day, Trump, employment is very good, sentiment is very good, but what is not good is the very area where he is trying to make things better, which is manufacturing and trade balance. So let's see.
Just a couple of, I think, an hour or two ago, I mean, Mexico announced new measures in response to the hike in US steel tariffs. And of course, those measures are set to be announced next week. So global leaders are now kind of like softening up to talks with Trump regarding these steel tariffs.
I don't know if they've got a massive choice, to be honest, in some respects. But, you know, Donald Trump elected on making America great again, the Cap-C wall, we cannot forget that. As you said, US steel makers really on the up because they're going to get a lot more business in their mind. But let's see how this all pans out, because it's been a really interesting ride for markets. And still, we can't forget, even though markets are ticking higher, there's always a little bit of uncertainty. And finally, Wissam and Wandi, we've come to the favourite part of my show, where you've come up with a couple of fabulous, quirky stories. And Wandi, I absolutely love the story. The world of gaming is becoming more popular amongst pensioners. I can't believe they can play games. Not that that's... I can't, you know?
Well, in England,
Yeah.
old school traditional video gaming stores are now coming back.
Wow,
So
yeah.
you have senior citizens who are looking for entertainment, but obviously, they want to reminisce about the good old days, when they were young. So obviously there's a market for it because, these stores, these video game stores are opening up. So I think it's quite interesting that, at that age...
Are they
in your
playing
50s.
Tetris?
So did you remember those? I'm very young, so I don't really remember those
What's
games.
that?
It's basically one of those video game. I don't know what they
Like
call
the
them.
Pac-Man?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
like
Pac-Man.
the
But the flip of the story, and I love your story, really, is that somehow we have always associated video gaming with young people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And with people who are hip and young. And suddenly we discovered that the first generation of those who went into video gaming are now old people somehow, and they are in their pensions. And this is the very, unfortunate side of how time passes.
Yeah.
Once I said, you think you are novelty, and then you discover you became nostalgia. And this is what's happening. The first generation of video gamers are now in their, pension.
Look,
Basic.
I love the idea. I think for me, when I'm a pensioner, I think, well, I would want jumping castles to be installed at certain events, just to bring out...
just so you can jump on the castle.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
I relate
a good
to
idea.
that more.
Yeah, as long as you don't fall off.
And break my bones.
Yeah, no, but you won't, as long as they've got the thing. But I'll tell you something that I like about the story is that it's a place where older people can come together, because we know often they may live on their own or away from family. So, reuniting around doing something like this is just really positive for that generation, and it will probably bring them a lot of purpose. And Wissam, I love your stories because it seems to always be about aliens. They really could exist on a so-called super Earth planet. And we've spoken about this before. I know we have, and I definitely believe in aliens. So where can I go and visit aliens?
If you want to go see where all those aliens are hiding, you have to believe the Chinese scientists who just discovered this amazing planet that is called Kepler 725c. It is
catchy.
very catchy.
Yeah,
it is
yeah.
2,400 light years away from us. So
Okay.
if you travel today with the speed of light, you would reach there after 2,400 years. And it is 10 times the volume of Earth, but it has the perfect combination of environment that will let life flourish there. It has the right distance from its star. It has the right, conditions to make water, and eventually to have oxygen and to live. But my question: why are we so desperate to find a place where we could move, and we can't really move there? Let's make this place better.
I can answer that question. Obviously, with everything that's happening, with all these wars, look at what's happening in Gaza. I think this is the right time to actually migrate.
Flee the planet.
But yeah, maybe. But I just absolutely, I always find space so fascinating, and how they're discovering more and more and more. And I do think the more we learn about it, we can't deny that we're not alone.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with that.
I don't really believe in aliens.
I believe in aliens. I'll repeat it one more time. We are the aliens.
If you believe in aliens, do you believe in ghosts?
Maybe. I don't know.
Because to me, it's the same thing.
Aliens are hypothetically the name we give for the very strong possibility and probability of having life somewhere else in this world. Because scientifically, probability tells us that the possibility of having life somewhere else is almost certain. But we haven't seen it first, and then we haven't found the way to go there. If we only break this very simple barrier of traveling very fast that will open all the possibilities.
Or
for us.
Wissam of getting into Area 51.
Yeah.
One of those two. But I just, yeah.
For me, Leigh-Ann, if are we going to pay tax?
There or tariffs?
Oh,
I don't
tax
know.
or tariffs.
But
I
you
would
know,
then consider moving if obviously
if
we're
we
not gonna pay
discover
tax.
that we are not alone, does it really make us not alone, Leigh-Ann? I don't know. We are alone at the end,
But
whether with aliens or without aliens.
Yeah, that's true. But Wandi, you'll be travelling, as Wissam said, 24,000 light years away. So maybe when you get there, eventually you can play your video game.
Yeah.
Who knows? So you might be a
Or you need
pensioner.
it on the way, at least.
I just want to say thanks to today's guests, Al Arabiya English journalist Wandi Ntengento and Al Arabiya editor Wissam Keyrouz. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. GNT with Tom Burgess Watson is coming up next. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.